Good morning, everyone, or good evening, depending on the place of the world that you are listening to us. We want to thank you so much to the ones that join us today to this tea talk that we are having here. Please let your comments and questions during the session in the comment section and probably we're going to work them during the session too. My name is Liliana Domingues. I'm the founder and managing director of Amarna Vida. And today I'm the moderator for our tea talk that we are having today here, where I'm very pleased to talk with Jennifer Sheffield and to talk about a theme that I'm very passionate about. The title is The Importance of a Compassionate, Resilient and Regenerative Approach in MENA Region Cities. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining us from Israel today. So Jennifer is lead faculty with 15 years of experience in sustainability and green building in the US and Israel, because she actually comes from the United States. She has been advancing sustainability in the city of Sakin, which I hope I'm spelling well, Arab city in Israel, Galilee region, for a decade. So she's international relations coordinator for Sakin College and is an advisor for Sakin municipality. She also serves head of lead consulting for WAWA, a green building, which I think I'm spelling well, a green building consulting firm. She directed the LEED Platinum certification of Intel Corporation US Smart Building in Tel Aviv. She was the project manager for Rumble Poland, a regenerative development in the US that won in 2018 Malcolm Lewis Impact. So she's an expert in this green building themes and also regenerative cities. So since you've been working for so long in the field of sustainability, specific regarding cities and buildings, I would like to ask a question Jennifer, to start with. What were your personal drives to embark in this journey? What could you share with us and the main milestones for your life purpose that you are living now? Thank you so much once again, and thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to listen to you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, and thank you, Liliana. Thank you to the Amarna Vida team for hosting important sessions that bring together people looking to make an impact on the world. So yes, my name is Jennifer Sheffield. I am an American import into Israel, specifically in the Arab Society of Israel, and I'll talk a little bit more about that today. But in terms of what drives me and milestones, I remember my mother telling me when I was a child, I was like 4 years old, and I cleaned my room, and I came out crying. I said, someone is hurting in the world, and I just feel it. And I just have always resonated with the people and suffering throughout our world. But I've had the opportunity to not focus solely on feeling that pain, but to look for some opportunities to connect and to motivate and to become inspired myself through not just problem solving, because when you solve a problem, you usually create more, but finding solutions that can be created together with the people of a certain area. So different milestones along the way. Going to Guatemala after I finished my first degree in the U.S., then going to D.C. where I got introduced into green building. I don't have a background in the built environment academically, and it took me a while to get on board with that. And then I'll tell you a little bit about my story or my journey. The biggest milestone in my life was I was working as a consultant in D.C. U.S. Green Building Council was one of my clients and doing different things. And I decided at the time And I was going to do a master's degree in peace and conflict, and my company supported me in that. I didn't know what conflict and peace and all this had to do with green building, but they let me to go on this adventure. And I was finishing my first year, and the executive director, Hussein Tanabia, the executive director of an environmental center in an Arab city in Israel, gave a presentation about his work. They had just built a green building. And suddenly, I literally had to hold on to the bottom of my chair, the seat, to keep me from bouncing out of it because I'm a very energetic person. And I was so excited because I just knew, it was like a lightning bolt hit my spine. And I just knew that this is where I had to come. Supposedly it was to do an internship for 6 weeks that I was going to do for 3 months instead, to integrate green building and peace building, and then it turned into the stage of my life's work. So that definitely was one of the biggest milestones in my life.
So I will ask you, you lived for many years in Israel, I guess, from now, that you lived from States to Israel. We all know that Israel is a very divided society. How does compassion, resilience, and regeneration play a role in divided societies? From your experience and being from United States and now living in such a powerful and controversial region of the world, what can compassion, resilience, and regeneration bring to the peace to that region?
Yeah, this is a great question. There are some difficulties in the U.S. and as well as in Israel, and we're having a time of where resilience and compassion and regenerative. But I want to focus more on compassion because this, I think, at this moment, with the racial justice movement in the U.S. and a lot of tensions within Israel and the region as well. Those are my children, by the way. We are in we are in a second lockdown here in Israel, especially in my city. I apologize for the background, but it's life.
No worries.
I want to focus on.
It's part of it.
Absolutely. So I want to focus on compassion because when you hear the politics and the division and all of these things, we talk past each other on solutions or on things that we're upset about or whatever. And I don't think we do enough to recognize the dignity, the divine, the sacred, the human spirit within one another. And it's something that I personally am really working on. As much as I dislike a lot of political maneuvering happening within Israel, within the US, across the world, I'm trying to focus my comments and my perception on I'm upset about this position or this political philosophy. I'm not going to attack the individual. I need to use my language and my words and my mindset to focus on the behavior and not attack. Because remember that person has every right to life the same way I do. And when you have that internal philosophy, it helps to change the way you see things. It also helps to not get so angry and so upset about all the rhetoric and things that you hear.
Yeah, I think you pointed out a very good theme, because even people that are more in this kind of way of looking further in society, some of the time they don't feel very compassionate about the person, what is happening, and they are very angry what is happening, and probably that's not the right place to bring changes, not from the range part of it, but from the compassion part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, I'd love to hear more about your work in the second municipality, and to actually how you are implementing these principles to really create this compassionate team there.
Great. Yeah. So let me jump into it, and I'll share a few slides so at least we have some visuals besides my children running behind us.
Okay.
go to this.
Which is lovely too.
As lovely as they are, but they're going a little crazy themselves, a little bit of stir crazy. I need to get outside a little bit more.
Normal. It's too much lockdown.
It is, yes. This is our second time. I hope the last. Please let me know when you can you see the screen?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. So having done this, I can't see any of you. So Liliana, just please. And I'm actually, I think we have a small group. I'm happy to have people just interject, to stop and ask a question. I speak very quickly.
Yeah.
You should see me eat and drive. I'll do everything with a lot of speed, so I try to slow it down. Please shout out. Someone said, please reel it back in. I don't understand what she said. Please feel free to make this more of a conversation.
Yeah. We have Sharam, Louise, and Bo, and some other people, I think, here. So we are on family right now. So everything is okay.
Great. Lovely to meet all of you and look forward to continuing more conversations in the future. So just to quickly orient where I'm at, the MENA region being, depending on what you're talking about and which aspects you're focusing on and themes, it can encompass certain countries or not, but we see the dark green, that's mostly what is commonly referred to as MENA. Some of the terms we'll talk about. Let's start with regenerative, and I'm sure you've seen all of that before. What we want to move toward is a model that is currently right now we're a very profit-driven consumer culture where we want to extract value from every piece of land, every possible idea, everything there is, and we want to move toward a model that instead optimizes this relationship between humanity and nature. And we need to think more about, at the city level, more about moving forward using natural resources, but also regenerating them. So moving towards system thinking. And I'm sure you've seen this visual before. We're talking about like green building. It's a great concept, but it's still doing less bad. It's not working toward creating. It's about doing less environmental harm usually. And again, talking about things like in regenerative, you have biophilia or circular economy, all of these things that look toward whatever's coming in to be a life source or to be used as fuel, so we reduce what's going out. I'll give you an example, and this is not in the MENA region. This is a project in close to Philadelphia in Pennsylvania in the United States on the East Coast. It's Rambo Land. A lovely man named Ron Rambo, who has been using a wheelchair for most of his adult life, has trouble finding adequate housing due to even what we call American Disabilities Act or ADA compliant, where you have certain door widths and all of that. There's still limited. Is still not comfortable living. He had a bathroom that he couldn't even enter. His wheelchair couldn't even enter. Stairs walking up to the entranceway. All these limitations just to have a normal life that all of us, to be independent, all of us deserve to have. So this project was about designing and building a home for him. He specifically wanted a single family home for himself. But the idea, we thought this is a great proof of concept for what could be a group. So if we took this home that you see in the right corner and you extended it up into a larger tower, a larger residential area, you could have multi-family residents, and it could be an idea that makes more sense in terms of energy grid. So I'll tell you a little bit more about it. It's that this home is designed to be independent from the energy grid, so it has community PV or solar panels, and not just for that house, but a community for the neighborhood. And this is one of the core themes that we explored, is that creating systems and strategies that integrate into the neighborhood and support the neighborhood, and the neighborhood supports it. So having no connection or being independent from the city water and the sewer, because we have rainwater and on-site treatment that is used to go in towards urban farming, which produces 50% of Ron's nutritional needs on site, and running that farm creates jobs. I think we found that it created 2 in this model for a single person home, whereas if it were a larger development, it would be more. And so you can take those farming produce and go to local restaurants and local farmers markets, etc. And all of this becoming a circular loop where you have ecological restoration and you have community job creation and you have meeting local food needs, and all of that becomes one small example of how you could scale that and become more into regenerative. So I want to move for a second and talk about resilience.
Okay. What was the major lesson? What was the major lesson of that project that you showed us? Ramboland? Because I know you win a big award with this project.
Yes. So it was an award for the Malcolm Lewis Impact Award from the U.S. Green Building Council, because this particular project was based on a lot of volunteer work. But it was an award about, I think, innovation and regeneration to bringing all of these different elements together, being not only ecologically important, environmentally important because we're regenerating, but bringing in the community. And so social systems are impacted, the environmental, and how the social and the ecological have a symbiotic relationship and they're working together. So that was a big, I wouldn't say it's so much a lesson for me as an important proof of concept that this is an example that we can hold up to the development world, real estate world, and saying this is the kind of thinking and the kind of approach we need to take toward real estate development and programs throughout the world, not just in one small town, but even in larger urban areas. So it's still such a new, it's not widely embraced. So this is just one example of that we can use that to hold up to developers and to others, stakeholders and investors, into thinking more along this way.
Oh, nice.
Okay, so let me jump back to resilient cities, and you see that there's a lot of things that cities have to deal with, a lot of issues, and right now we're in a pandemic, and every city is working on that as well as national level and international level. But that's not the only issue we have. I mean, we have all of the climate change issues, we have riots, we have cyber attacks, we have chemical attacks. And I put up the picture of this is in June of this year. This is where we had protesting happening in the U.S. as a result of the George Floyd murder. And it was showing, this particular image is showing that the protests, which are in blue, these are peaceful protests, and then I think the orange dots is where spots of violence were happening. They don't have an updated version. I looked yesterday for this, but this is an issue that cities have to contend with, and it's part of resilience efforts, right? And I guess a more recent example in Beirut, when you take a city or a region that's already experiencing difficult times and difficult instability. You know, they had a lot of car bombings just from 2013 to 2015. Right now, there's a lot of accusations of corruption and economic struggle. So then you add on to it the pandemic and this explosion, and it's shocks and stresses and so much to bear, right? So let me pause on that and resilience and move toward compassionate. And this is the one, this is where I think we have the most potential, because it is such a need that we have to solve problems or to think creatively and come together. And we can't do that until we learn how to talk to each other and with each other and not just scream at each other. This is this is really laying on my heart lately as I spoke earlier about it, because maybe it's because it's an election cycle in the US, and so it really comes out right now about all of the not great aspects of humanity and how we push our agendas and the things that the tactics or strategies that we resort to in order to push that agenda. But really, compassionate cities. This is talking about. It's really just talking about acknowledging the dignity of every single person, no matter that person's viewpoint, religion, sexual orientation, everything like that. And it's about, and also compassion with ourselves. But it's about even when they're saying something and you get upset and you react, to take that moment to stop and think and say, this is a person and I'm upset about this particular thing, and I'm not going to devalue that person as a human being. So just compassion is looking at the importance, the sanctity, the dignity of every single person, and to think about it in terms of justice, equity, and respect. So let me go to, so there's actually, if I'll share some resources toward the end, but go ahead, Liliana.
No, very nice what you are showing.
So I'll share some resources at the end about how communities resources to engage and become a compassionate community or a compassionate city. For example, the city of Orlando has signed the Charter of Compassion. I've signed it as a personal individual, but we're working to get more cities to sign it. And there are some, like a toolkit and some resources for how you address compassion at a community level. But just the responsibility of taking care for each other, no matter who it is in the community or who it is in the city. And I think it's an internal philosophy that manifests in outward actions.
Mm-hmm.
So in thinking about this,
Mm-hmm.
this becomes rooted in equality, equity, justice, and just to probably you've seen some of these before, but the reality is, you see on the image on the left, some people have a great vantage point and some people have had the hole dug for them, correct? So when we think about equality, it's handing out the resources equally in equal measure, but that doesn't fix the problem. And even in equity, meaning that you hand out resources or opportunities or invest more in those that are disadvantaged or front lines feeling the worst impacts, it still doesn't change the system. So looking at the far right, social justice, and right now in the racial justice movement, they're calling it liberation. For example, if you've heard of defund the police, it's a whole movement to really rethink the way that we have our society organized and the services and the institutions that we have built. And I don't necessarily advocate for going and tearing down all of the systems that we have. I mean, in an ideal world, yes, but in an ideal world, we wouldn't need to. But to really start thinking of, instead of looking at a one-off problem and saying, here's one problem and here's the solution for it, to rethink the entire system and the entire solution. So here's another image. Here's another image for equity. Social equity implies fair access to livelihood, education, and resources, full participation in political and cultural life. All of this, we can meet all of the needs. And the question I pose to the group is, how does equity relate to compassion and resilience and regeneration? Because in traditional models of sustainability that we've come through the past 40, 50 years, it's a great focus on doing less harm to the environment, but the systems that provide for humans and to meet their daily needs are not usually in that conversation. So I think that is an important aspect of the approach that is regenerative and compassionate and resilient. Before I start to give a little bit of background in my city, Sakhneen, do we have any questions or any comments that we want to discuss?
Yeah, I think Sharon has here a question. You will enter the conversation. I will give him the opportunity before you go ahead. I don't know if Sharon, are you there? Yes, he wants to connect. Hello, Sharon. Good morning.
Hello.
You are in a
Hi.
beautiful place today.
I feel terrible that I'm outdoor suddenly.
Good morning.
Yes. Yeah. Good morning. Hello. This is Shram. It's lovely to see you again, Jennifer. We kind of met on the last seminar. So great to really the topic is fascinating because it's bringing in the issue of peace and also I mean compassion is something I've been thinking about, but also this particular example is so charged
Yeah.
emotionally and
Yes.
historically that it just feels. Uh, I mean, to look at it from this perspective of compassion is very nice, but on the ground it just feels so impossible because so many people have tried. And I hope that we can do that, of course, and I'm hopeful. But one of the points I wanted to make is that it's actually a question in the sense that I wonder if recently I was thinking about why there's so much conflict and even the idea of competition in economics and also competition for natural resources, which has led to a lot of this extractive behavior and competition between people that adopt this kind of perspective of scarcity and that their neighbor is going to come and take their land or that they're not going to have food to eat and that their ideals are going to be threatened, what they believe in is like being threatened or all these ideas, a lot of it I see comes from an imperial top-down
Mm.
mindset throughout history, where there has been some kind of hierarchical top-down organization, because
Mhm.
those top-down organizations have always needed to organize people into groups and divide them in order so that the people at the top can benefit from what they were trying to do, which is to compete with each other.
Yeah.
So as we know, for example, in Europe, a lot of the wars happened because actually not because people had a conflict, but because the establishment or the royal families or whatever they had a conflict between themselves. So they managed to get people under the same groups, and this is happening in the world as well. So from that kind of even the Westphalian model of countries going to war with each other, it wasn't that those countries and those people had a problem with each other.
Mm.
And in fact, we have so many examples where communities at the local level have coexisted for thousands of years from
Yes.
different religions. And
Mm-hmm.
suddenly someone from top down comes and puts a match and lights the whole thing up,
Yes.
because they start sowing division and start creating conflict and for specific interests. So it's really interesting because from a environmental justice and social justice movement perspective, the bottom up is becoming very relevant, and we know that now technology, thanks to the internet, is taking us to a horizontal network model
Yes.
where that resilience is starting to be able to be organized, because we've always had at the community level the weakness that we couldn't organize, whereas the hierarchical models, they had the ability to organize
Mm.
and in some ways even organize us in a better way that we could ourselves maybe. So it's just for me this is I wonder if we had to go through this terrible model to get here, or somehow like the example that you're saying is at the community level we don't have so much the problems because that competition sometimes doesn't exist, because the example you gave is that you can make thriving communities that have enough food for themselves to eat, they don't need to compete, everything goes around like at the local level is working,
Yes.
but sometimes it doesn't work at the top level, because the people
Yeah.
who fight for those resources, they make you think there is competition because they are competing, but in fact at the community level you don't need to compete because there's enough to go around. So I'm just wondering about this hierarchy versus horizontal model, whether how that fits in from your point of view.
I think you're absolutely right. I think none of these approaches that I'm discussing today will solve the problem of a top-down model and the way our world is structured politically, geopolitically. But Definitely, I think there's a lot of potential when you have communities that are thriving and successful and give an example that can be replicated in others. Sort of, critical mass, the idea of critical mass, when you see a group of people succeeding and you can permeate and radiate into other arenas. So I think that the more we have success at the local level and create strong systems there, the greater chance we have of toppling the top down. The top down approach is not problematic. It's the problem that the top is stuck in a power driven mentality.
Yes.
But yeah, that's
Thank
a
you for
great
that. Yeah.
point. But I think we also could see now that Jennifer showing us this example.
Yes, yes. So thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Let me describe it a little bit, and you can see some successes between groups in conflict, and maybe that will give some ideas or other aspects of the discussion. So this is the city I live in is Saknin. Let me orient you where that is. And actually, I'm getting a bit of an echo. Can we mute?
Yeah, you have.
Okay.
Yeah, you have.
That's a
No,
little
I
bit
think
better.
it was because of Sharam. Now it's okay.
Okay, great. Yeah, when we have more people talking. Okay, but definitely jump in. We can manage it.
Yeah.
So just to explain where I am and who I'm talking about when I talk about the Arab citizens of Israel, the Palestinian citizens of Israel, Arab Israelis, Palestinian Israelis. We go by a lot of different names. I always say Arab citizens because I don't want to confuse this group with Palestinians who do not hold citizenship in Israel and are struggling for their own nation. Okay, so within Israel, in 1948, there was a community of Palestinians that remained in Israel. They surrendered and over the years, became Israeli citizens, which is 20% of the national population. So Israel has, within what I call Israel proper, not the West Bank or Gaza, not the Palestinian occupied territories, but within Israel itself, 20% of that population is of Palestinian descent. All right, full and equal rights. The only thing that's really different for Arab Israelis is that they're not required to serve in the military. Okay, but as you can imagine, even though we have full and equal rights on paper and enjoy a lot of the same privileges in real life, given that this community is of the enemy, of the other, there's still a lot of tension, right? And you can see in the dark green region there, the Galilee, that's where I am. The Galilee and this region is where most of the Arab citizens of Israel live, and you can see that breakdown in those numbers. The Arab citizens are Muslim, and the Muslims are broken into a couple of main categories, being the Falahin and the Bedouin. Bedouin meaning historically nomadic, Falahin meaning country people, but now organized into towns and cities, as well as Christians and Druze. Let me go zoom in a little bit more into where I am in the Galilee. So Saknin is the city here in the red circle around it, Saknin. And then next to it is Araba, and then Derhana. I call that the Arab corridor because this green amoeba-looking structure is a Jewish regional council. So Mizgav is a way of administering small communities, like 30 communities. Those communities are like 300 people or so. And Saknin and Arabe, these are incorporated cities. Carmiel, also to the north, is also a city, and it's also incorporated itself. So what are some of the major needs in my city? Climate action, of course. This is a universal need everywhere, but we are making progress on that, and I'll share with that in a moment. Women in local government, also a very universal problem that there are in our city, even though there are women working in the city council and in the departments, there are no women in any decision-making capacities. So that poses a huge problem when half the population is not getting a vote. They can have discussions, but they're not getting a vote as a voting member of the city council. Also, we struggle with employment opportunities. Housing is a big issue. Of course, education, and I'm sure, as you can imagine, identity, because this is an Arab or Palestinian community or society that is living within what is really a Jewish nation. So there are issues of identity and keeping the language and the culture and the religion, all that thriving, while also integrating in terms of employment and even schools to some extent, all of this into the national framework. And then regional cooperation, and I'll talk more about that. Let me tell you about the organization that brought me to Israel. It's TAEQ, which is Towns Association for Environmental Quality. And what it is it started in Sakhneen in 1993 by Dr. Hussein Tarabia. He's the one that I told you I met in Washington, D.C. when he was giving his postdoctorate. He was giving a lecture about his work, and I had to hold on to my chair. So this is the organization, and this is literally the mission is to serve as a bridge of peace between people to people, and between people and the environment. And so you see the connection between peace building and all the work they have to do to cooperate within themselves, between Arab communities and within the Arab society, and Jewish Arab cooperation. So they developed this award-winning building. This is the building that brought me to Sakhneen. It is a building that they intentionally designed. They intentionally designed it as a hybrid between Arab traditional architecture. So you see the tall wind towers, malakoffs, and the stonework, and the arches, and the domes. And they intentionally designed that, as well as, I'll show you the whole complex. This part of it here, the part that doesn't have vegetation because it was early after it was constructed that the photo was taken, that's a high school that they built on top of it, or not on top of it, adjacent to it. But they did it to incorporate photovoltaics and solar energy and all of this as a green building, but as a building that honors their tradition and their culture, even though that's not the popular style here in Sakhneen or in the Arab Society of Israel. The popular style is to go towards more modern design. They wanted to do this, and it emerged as a community desire to honor their ancestors and the wisdom by going through more of a, it's not cultural preservation, but I say cultural celebration design. So this is an organization that, explain how it works. It's actually the environmental department of 6 Arab towns that have consolidated to have it like an environmental, like you have us at a city, the environmental department. So it runs as an environmental department for 6 towns that join together, but they also act as a nonprofit organization, as an environmental center, and they have won grants from the European Union and USAID and all of this to promote different programs, from energy conservation and green building to regional planning. They have Sul House, which is a center for conflict resolution that they've started to teach conflict resolution skills within the community. They promote ecotourism and sustainable agriculture, a lot of different things. Let me go into a couple of their projects. This is one of a big one, is that, as I told you earlier, we have Mizgav, the Jewish. Did you have a question, Liliana?
No, I'm just looking to the sculpture. Very nice.
Okay, yes. So this is commemorating Land Day in 1976, when I was telling you earlier that, let's look at this for a moment, that Mizgav is a Jewish regional council. Mizgav the land from Mizgav was developed in part from open area, but also in part from land that was appropriated, taken from farmers from Sakhneen and in this area. So when this happened in the 70s and 80s, through a policy called Judaization of the Galilee, where they literally saw that in the north there was a bunch of Arab communities and not enough Jewish communities, and they wanted to change that to make Israel one country and to have Jewish communities interspersed. So they took land and they created more Jewish communities. But in so doing, it created a huge land dispute between Saknin and the neighboring Arab towns and this newly formed regional council. Even though the specific people who were living there didn't create it, but the tensions were very high. So we had here a land dispute that was a microcosm of the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because all of those issues were manifesting. So a little bit of demographic understanding. Land Day, since 1976, we have on the March 31st every day we have demonstrations and parades. And I'll give you the argument from each side. So Saknin being an Arab city, majority Muslim, but they do have a really great relationship that they're proud of between their Muslim and Christian citizens. You can see it's 9.8 square kilometers, 30,000 residents. Socioeconomic level, I think it actually just moved up to a 3. So in Israel, socioeconomic is from 1 to 10, 10 being the highest and 1 is the worst. And Saknin recently moved from a 2 to a 3, whereas Misgav, which was developed in front of the eyes of the residents of Saknin, have 29 Jewish communities, 6 Bedouin Arab villages. It's 190,000 square kilometers, 21,000 residents altogether, and a higher socioeconomic level. So you can just see, just by looking at this statistics, that or these demographics, that there's tensions, right? So the arguments from both sides, Saknin said we have rapid urbanization, we haven't expanded our land by 1 centimeter since 1948. The residents own land that maybe even if Misgav hadn't built on it, it's under the Misgav jurisdiction. So basically that meant that the farmers or the people of Saknin could go to their land, they could harvest olives or do minimum things like that, but they couldn't build on it. They couldn't develop it. So they also had a housing crisis where there was nowhere for new couples to get married and to go live with their families. And the tradition here in Arab society is that the sons, they build homes within their parents' area, okay? And then the daughters, they move to their family, right? So it's constantly building. Every year, even in my family, we have our house, and every year someone's adding an addition to it to build up. We can go up to 4 or 6 stories, but there's always some sort of building is happening all the time. It's actually really great and very smart. People don't marry until they have built their house. So now that I'm married and have children, I think that's just a genius way to do it. But when you don't have land to develop, then couples were not getting married. So it really created a strain. You can see the strains that were happening. Whereas Misgav, their arguments were saying, this is at this time in the 70s and 80s, and even to today, we start to recognize the value of open space and that countries need a green lung area, and that the Galilee in this region was part of that. So they were mandated by Israel to preserve open space. Also, to be fair and realistic, they wanted a security buffer between themselves and neighboring Arab cities, because in moments of tension, like day to day, everything is calm, but in moments of tension, things happen, and they wanted to feel that security, and I can understand that. And they're saying that this is, you chose to incorporate as a city. You Saknin are a city. You have to develop vertically. You don't need to just expand out. You can't have single person home for a city of 30,000 people. You have to develop as a city, which is to go high in the sky. And also they argued that there was a neighboring Arab city that they could develop that way. So these are the arguments, and for years, Saknin went to the Ministry of Interior to appeal, to have a court case, all of this, and it was going nowhere. So I'm going to continue the story, but just to interject, thinking about how intercultural relationships can be strengthened through a compassionate, resilient, and regenerative approach. So what did my city do? Hussein Tarabia, my dear friend, he and some colleagues came together and they wanted to address sustainability issues across the region, and they needed to cooperate. But every time they got together with the stakeholders to talk about this issue, they could not move forward without addressing the land dispute. It was just constantly hitting a wall. So they developed a mediation process for 2 years between 2014 and 2016 that brought together the mayors of Saknin and some other high-level stakeholders, and then Misgab, to get them to start to build a process and to mediate. Right when they started off, there was another war in Gaza, so they couldn't publicly acknowledge that they were meeting. They had to do it secretive. They would hold meetings different places at 10 o'clock at night, and very intimate. It just became just the two mayors and the two mediators, and that was it, just to start to build the relationship. And finally, after a lot of work, in March of 2016, following 2 years, the mayors of the 3 Arab towns and the Misgab Regional Council signed a memorandum of understanding committing to cooperation. They agreed that the last ruling from the Israeli government about the land, they agreed to that, to both sides to accept it, and that they would end that land dispute and then move forward to focus on developing together. And this was really important, that you didn't just solve one problem by saying, yes, we accept the solution and that's it, but by saying at the same time we want to create a program and change the philosophy and the paradigm, that we will address issues that concern all of us. We'll address them together. So that's what they started to do. I'm gonna give another example, but I'm gonna do it really quickly. It's another example of in the Patufa Valley that basically Israel, they created a water carrier, and so when they developed this water carrier, they dug up land and they put in the pipe and all of this. The result was flooding. It created flooding in this valley, and in the valley were Arab farmers, also a small scale, very localized operations, very, very small communities. But it created a huge problem and lots of complaints that there was flooding. It was creating odors and issues with pests. So they came to my center and asked to help to find a solution. So the environmental center, TAQ, they could have gone and said, let's do this with this environmental, we can treat this problem, we can do all that. But they didn't do that. Instead, they brought everyone together. They brought together the National Park Authority, they brought together the community leaders, they brought together from the farmers from that valley, as well as the Jewish neighbors that were on the mountaintops that looked down on that valley. Because what happened is, so there's the flooding. What happened is, let me go to this one. Flooding created very beautiful mountain landscapes, and what happened is some of the Jewish entrepreneurs, they have that bed and breakfast, started getting really full because of this beautiful scenery and environment that was being created. Awesome. So they led a joint process to discover that, and they found out over a couple of years, and they found out that this area happened to be home to certain species that are not found anywhere in the world. So the Parks Authority was very interested in protecting that and wanted to create a program for that. And then once the relationships were built and the needs were understood between the Arab farmers and the Jewish entrepreneurs, they started to harvest. They created a program with local farming and ecotourism, to where they could bring people to experience tourism on the farms and buy produce there and have a story from the Arab farmers and learn about that life, and then go back to stay in those bed and breakfast. And the bed and breakfast would be supplied, their food and menus would be created from the the produce produced in these farms. So it became a whole system of goods and services and experience and ecotourism and sustainable agriculture, all based on, started from one problem that turned into a regenerative solution for the entire region. I'll give you some example of the wreaths and products. They had seasonal festivals, field markets, festivals where every year have 16,000 people coming for the 4 years it was operating to visit the area. And they had like cultural activities and many different things happening that you can build into it. And then these are some of the products that they sell. And you can see their logo, Batufna, meaning, and they would put on their Made in Peace by Women. So a lot of women's initiatives. So there were several sub-projects attached to this whole initiative. But I love that from this one complaint, and it was a really problem, instead of just taking the checklist approach of, okay, this is the problem, this is the technical solution, to bring all of the people together and create a creative solution that isn't just a solution, it's a rethinking of the potential of that valley, and to expand that potential to support the Arab farmers and the neighboring communities.
Nice. I was asking you, since you mentioned women and role of them on it in that community, I actually would trigger you at this point, since we are both women also. You think that women have a special role in this role of resilience and compassionate cities and villages? You think that we have a special role on it?
Absolutely. First of all, when women are absent, then you're absent of all of those solutions and creative energy and all of the nurturing, all of these things. And that's true for any group. Any group that has a role in the life of that area, if they're not at the table of generating solutions and discussion, then they're missing that voice. But women in particular, I mean, even you look at the Colombian peace process, or even in Northern Ireland, women have brought to those discussions different ideas and aspects and ways of thinking that, had they not been there, would not have been engaged. So I definitely think that women, that there should be, I don't have to say there's a certain number of gender balance or whatever it is, but women should be included and have a decision-making capacity. So not just they're heard, but they have a vote. So their voice can be activated. I think it's really critical because you can't have a resilient community or a regenerative, focusing also on the social systems that play into and feed into environmental systems without uplifting half of the population. And I think that there's a lot we still have to see in the future as we start every day creating history of leadership from women who are now, becoming emboldened to take their place and to lead these initiatives. So definitely, I think that there's a role and a need in women.
Mm-hmm.
So due to the time, I think I want to go to the wrong side. Let me go out from here to. These are some notes that I have for key things that have been for me and working in cities and different initiatives in the region. Talking about the Charter for Compassion, you can Google that. There's lots of resources there. I find that mediation and negotiation, which, by the way, having learned a lot about it the past few years, is not what you think of initially. It's a whole process of learning to understand the other. I think that some key lesson is thinking about urban farms and water and that energy, the whole nexus there, as well as always thinking about our input and output flows. And then, systems thinking and equity, all of these roles or all of these dynamics are moving together. So those are the things that I would offer as important and critical steps into approaches related to compassion, resilience, and regenerative. And I want to leave a closing thought, and then you can have some more questions. I want to offer this clause that was in the MOU between Sakhneen and the Jewish government, Misgav. And something that's uplifting to me is that although aware that there will be obstacles and difficulties along the way, and that the task may even seem daunting at times, we will be steadfast in our work to implement these goals. We will hold on to a vision of the common good for the sake of our children and future generations. So I love that because of this process and where we are in this moment in time, these communities that have had, remember, very bitter conflict over the past decades, are now working together to create solutions and initiatives for the benefit, not just to address problems, but to co-create together different solutions for the benefit of the entire Lower Galilee region.
So actually, I was. This is the lasting point, but I have some questions here, and of course, we also have some questions from the people that are listening to us. And if someone wants to request the micro, if it's not very extended, please go ahead. But I have this question for you right now. It's what can city leaders right now, and since we are in this special time that we are living now, inclusive you are in lockdown, so cities maybe have to refrain themselves, because what we are living is now, it's not compassion at all. We are more isolated, and we are coming across to being more separated. The only thing that connects us more is this virtual space that we more and more are able to use it. So actually now I think personally that city leaders and all of us, in fact, have even a more challenge than we had before to create resilient cities that help us gather in the situation that people are more and more afraid to be in touch with each other. So what do you think that city leaders, and you be one of the person that in your own city has a role on it, what the other city leaders can do to in this time frame to really build compassionate and resilient cities and regenerative ones? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you've made an interesting observation that this is a time where we need more compassion, and because of the strain that we're all feeling, and because of like election cycles and things that are happening as life continues, we're feeling it even less compassion, right? It's a tough moment. First of all, us as citizens and as passionate, compassionate people, there's a lot we can do individually, and I think really compassion and being the foundation for it, that as ourselves change the mindset and to call upon our leaders, our elected officials, people who have policies and ideals that align with us individually, to call on them to have compassion. And compassion, if they need a better word to operationalize, can be, have respect in your language. I think this is the first immediate step that can help to calm all of this craziness, in Israel we say balagan, the chaos of what you hear out there. I mean, there's a lot of, here in Israel and in the US, I'm hearing all of the conspiracy theories and there is no virus and all of this. Fine, everyone can believe what she or he is called to believe, what resonates with them, but we should all have compassion, meaning respect for the person, even if you don't agree with the position. You can respect something. I can respect even someone who has committed what I view as the worst crime. I can respect that they are a person who deserves dignity and respect as a human being, with the breathing the essence of life, without at all condoning someone's behavior or actions or words, right? So this, I think, for me, this is a huge one, and something that we can all do. And so one thing, when I do have a chance to influence or I don't say influence, let's say I have the ear of an elected official, just to remind them of that responsibility, that there is a way of speaking even and taking that and practicing it behind closed doors is something that I've really struggled with myself. Not just in front of people when the camera's there, but even shifting it inside yourself that this is something you agree to, that you're going to work on yourself. And it may be a daily struggle. It's not like flipping a light switch and the light's on and then that's it. We have to have compassion all the time, and it's always a struggle. But I've committed myself personally on that journey, and it is a journey, and that I will continue to do that and to hold our elected officials. And if it's not only at political city level, then at your business or at your whatever the organization is, hold them to that. And that's for me the starting point.
Okay, nice. So maybe some leaders have to do some together retreats or something like that. And
yeah, there's a toolkit. Those are the toolkit. Yeah. But leading by example, and sometimes we, those who can influence the leaders, sometimes we the middle people have to influence the leaders and the grassroots by modeling this behavior and speaking out on it. Yes, there needs some tools. You're right.
Yeah, but it also starts from ourselves. It's a bottom-up thing. If we are in a compassionate way of making it, even with our own words, with maybe some people are just against the politician of the cities and they are not good. Even that kind of speech is not the right energy, as I see it at least, and I think you agree with me. So we also have some comments here, and I don't know if you are able to see them, but regardless, we have here Luis. He has some comments. I don't know if Luis, you want to have some question, you can pick the Miko. If not, I will try do my best to gather ramp it up some of the questions that he has. Major is it's comments, but I will make it. So he's saying that it's not easy to be passionate about the equal dignity of all, yet be compassionate towards the very people who attack it. So it's one of his comments. I'm not sure if he has a specific question, but I think I sense that the majority are comments. Also, Bo, who also is watching us from United States, he is a kind of your country neighbor. In a sense, he is saying that he agrees with you of a regenerative society need women in leadership. I want to actually reinforce that. I don't think it's only women. It's the female side of women and also men that we are needed, because there are a lot of women that are more in masculine mode right now, and they are more competitors and more aggressive than the majority of men that right now. So I think Shannon has a comment. If it's short, if you want to have the mic on this short one, please, Shannon, go ahead. We are very pleased to have
Thank you very much, and it's really. Can you hear me?
I don't know. I don't listen to your question.
Can you hear me?
Hello, Shannon.
Hello, can you hear me now? Hello? Hello?
Okay.
Hello?
I'm just listening to us because we are a little update of our schedule.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Sharam. I don't know if you are trying to or you are writing down the question.
Luis can hear me, no?
I was looking forward to it, but if it doesn't happen, we also have to feel compassionate about right now Jennifer, because she's doing this with her kids, and I know it's not easy to handling it, and so we appreciate so much that you are able to do this today, and I know that you are working from home and it's not easy. So okay, Sharon is requesting the mic. I will just let him